Walt, this week you went from partying down on Bourbon Street to testing autonomy on Market Street. This is right during the middle of earnings reports from Lyft and Aurora. First of all, how the heck are you awake doing this? And second of all, what did you learn from the capital of autonomy development in San Francisco?
Well, thank you to our listeners for enduring getting this thing on Sunday. I know I like to advertise this as every Saturday, but having some extra sleep after this long week of not a lot of sleep is definitely helpful. Look, it was great again to integrate myself within the autonomy community. What a great group of people, very smart, always trying to help to advance my understanding of what's going on. Because obviously this is like complex stuff and everyone has very strong opinions and it's certainly very helpful. No, look, in terms of Uber, who's kind of in my world, the largest public manifestation of this. Yes, Google is larger, but Waymo isn't necessarily having as large of an impact on Google as autonomy is having on Uber. I think in this past podcast, I've talked about how all of these headlines are potentially negative for Uber in terms of autonomy. But I think I'm coming to the kind of realization that they're actually in the middle of these, there are possible positive headlines as it relates to Uber and autonomy in terms of partnerships and some substantiation that fragmentation can happen in the market. And OEMs might have a path for success, obviously under a lot of pressure, which could benefit from Uber. And I think those will kind of intermingle, which is in our world probably good for traders to kind of understand the back and forth and the battles that will exist and people understanding, what the future is for autonomy. So I thought that was kind of a pretty big takeaway for me. More on LiDAR. My understanding of LiDAR continues to grow. Although, Grayson, I think what I'm a little worried about is, you've been kind of anti-Hesai and believing that, it will get banned. I'm not sure that there is a legit replacement for Hesai and a lot of the companies that are using them as a LiDAR sensor. So I'm just curious from your standpoint, like, what are you seeing in terms of the industry trying to work with government to say like in telco, and I think I've talked about this before, when they got rid of Huawei, they gave operators a chance of a timeline to pull this stuff out and actually offered funding to rip and replace Huawei equipment. How do you think this Hesai thing is going to play out?
First of all, we're very honored. We have the CEO of Hesai coming on the Road to Autonomy podcast in March. That'll be a really special episode.
That's great.
So we'll get some insight on that. That'll be after Hesai reports their earnings. How I see it playing out is they're probably going to have to split the company in two, have a U.S. division and a Chinese division, because Hesai is such a critical LiDAR component for both the autonomous vehicle side and the autonomous truck side. So there's really no way forward. There's no alternative in the market. Companies have tried alternative LiDARs. Nothing is nearly as good as Hesai, and Hesai is on every autonomous vehicle not named Waymo today. So that tells you about the quality of the product they're producing.
Look, I thought TikTok was going to be gone, and just this week, TikTok is now, it obviously never really went away for a day, but it wasn't available in the App Store until this week. So I think there could be a willingness on the part of the government, but I think that necessitates the industry sending the message to the Trump administration, pointing out the importance of Hesai here in the near term to get a lot of these trials and early implementations off the ground, even if there is a longer term goal of getting the manufacturing and, as you say, maybe splitting the company up. Do you think that's feasible, or is it possible that in the very, quick actions of our government that we're seeing in other implementations as far as what Doge is doing, that Hesai could fall victim of kind of a quick decision by someone in the administration?
There are political risks, but if we go back in history, Hesai was founded at Stanford University, the first office, Silicon Valley, before they moved operations overseas. So to me, there is a very clear path to separate the company and have a U.S. division, say have a ex-U.S. division. The politics, where that goes, I am unsure, but I will say and state for the record that Hesai is a critical component to the future of autonomous driving. And right now it's needed because, as I said earlier, there is no alternative.
And look, I'm not going to commit to say that they're important for the future, but my takeaway is they are very important for the now, and the now meaning like the next 12 to 18 months. If Labor, O'Brien, gets wind of this and uses this as a lever to try and throw a wrench in the works of autonomy, which, might be perceived, in our view, I know we share this, wrongly as far as bad for, labor and the economy in the U.S. Is that a risk that we have? Has O'Brien chirped up about this at all?
Brian hasn't chirped up about it, no, but it wouldn't surprise me any tactics that he would try. What really needs to happen, to cut to the chase, is that there needs to be an alternative. The engineers have to agree on an alternative. There is an opportunity in the market for somebody to advance technology to achieve what Hesai is being able to achieve, but nobody's been able to do that yet. And I had the CEO of Ouster coming up on an upcoming episode, and they're moving much more into infrastructure, not really focusing on autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks, moving towards infrastructure. So there's a lot of change coming in the LiDAR market.
Grayson, one of the reasons I was excited to partner with you in terms of Autonomy Markets was the library of people that you got. And even on this trip, I met with some people that you had previous interviews in your library. It's great to see you've got now Hesai and Ouster lined up. So appreciate that and keep doing it. Keep doing it. That stuff's awesome. And for those that maybe only listen to this podcast, you should look into Grayson's library. A lot of good background stuff there. Let me move on to my personal experience with Waymo. I can't even remember the last time I was in San Francisco. I think we talked about it a little bit on this podcast a couple of months ago. It feels like the cars have gotten more aggressive in how they drive. I mean, I was making a left turn. There was a little old lady with a caretaker crossing. I thought the Waymo was going to try and cut in front of her. The caretaker gave the car a dirty look and then saw that there's no one driving it. Just overall, it felt more like a human in a very short period of time. And then in addition to that, Grayson, and probably more relevant, is I noticed what I would call an easy pass, like one of those RF, pieces of equipment that enable you to get on highways. So it feels like that's a pretty big signal that they're getting the fleet ready to start sending those cars out on the highways, isn't it?
The highway unlock's coming soon. I would say the highway unlock's probably going to come in the next 3 months. It's coming. And if you look at every announcement a Waymo's made with a road trip city, really good. But then if you go read the local newspapers, every comment, the San Diego local papers, the Las Vegas local papers, they all mention highway testing. It is clearly coming. That unlock is coming sooner rather than later.
I had many takeaways, but the last I want to comment on here is Zoox. Saw a bunch of Zoox. I tweeted a picture of a Zoox testing car, but my sense from the industry just doesn't necessarily feel positive. I know you've said this before, and I've pushed back in terms of, kind of their progress and kind of a culture of moving towards quick progress here. Again, a lot of these people are probably competitors, so everyone likes to talk their book. Should we be concerned about Zoox? It feels like, by the way, when Tesla started talking about autonomy, it helped everyone, right? It put pressure on perhaps Waymo and Uber to get closer together. Everyone seemed like they upped their game, which is great. That's exactly how a free market and competition should work. Is it happening at Zoox? Where is the sense of urgency at that company?
There is no sense of urgency, and I will direct this to Mr. Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon. Mr. Jassy, I've tweeted at you, sir. I've sent notes to your IR team. As an Amazon shareholder, and a lot of the individuals that listen to this podcast are Amazon shareholders, we would really love clarity on the Zoox business, sir. Where are you going with Zoox? There is no clarity in the market, sir. All we hear is about the culture internally at Zoox. We had the Verge article that came out and talked about how the suspension was horrendous. That was the Verge said that, not me questioning. And the Verge further questioned the technology. So there's questions about the suspension of the rod of the vehicle. There's questions about the autonomous driving that's out there in the publicly sourced to the Verge, not just industry gossip anymore. What is the path forward? How are these cars going to scale? And here's the big question. It's a lot more comfortable riding in a Highlander, and I've ridden in the Zoox Highlanders, than it is riding in the Toaster. Does Zoox have to abandon the Toaster and go to the Highlanders and follow the lead of the market?
Okay, so I'm going to push back on many, many things that you just said. First, I just think maybe there needs to be more aggression in terms of how they're dealing with things. Second, Verge. I mean, there's plenty of the things that Verge writes about a lot of different topics that I'm not sure that we necessarily need to assume is gospel by any stretch. And thirdly, I've ridden in a Zoox Toaster. I mean, granted, it was on kind of a limited roads. Maybe it wasn't like a New York or the New Orleans roads that I just experienced, which are horrific. I thought the suspension was fine. I thought it was, again, a very comfortable ride. Although, as I do more work on this industry, I'm increasingly moving away from the concept of a purpose-driven vehicle being the answer, meaning, either partnerships or otherwise using product that, especially when you get into financing and you talk about residual values of vehicles, having like an actual car as opposed to like a vehicle, what the hell are you going to do with it after the fact? I think these, maybe not the best strategy for the company. So maybe they should take those testing vehicles, as you're pointing out, and use them as opposed to this, this kind of belligerence and sticking with the toaster.
I don't know what causes stick with the toaster. We have no data on how much it costs to manufacture the toaster. We have no data on what it costs to maintain the toaster. We have no data on how many miles or how many years or rides the toaster is going to do. And second of all, outside of Las Vegas, which is a tourist attraction destination, we don't know if the consumer wants to face one another. I've said this many podcasts. I don't want to ride with anybody. I don't want to face anybody. And I did a podcast with my good friend Pete Bigelow about this, and Sergey from Coop. If somebody gets drunk and tries to open those doors, would they open? Because people drink in Vegas. Let's be honest.
No, they'll just puke in there and they'll send it to a service center to clean it up. But Grayson, the cost of a Jaguar and the amount of equipment, all self-developed by Waymo, was also very expensive. And look, they're behind. I mean, they're where Google started how many years ago in that market. So starting with the expensive equipment, I don't think is terrible. But at some point, again, I'm coming more into your camp that it has to evolve into, either some integration or using kits on existing vehicles, to kind of get that going.
What if Mr. Jassy and the board of Amazon said we're not worth this investment and they decided to license the Zoox stack? What impact does that have?
I mean, I think that's great, assuming that they've got something that's licensable, that's something someone's interested in taking, right? I mean, obviously Nuro's in the market today with their technology, targeting a Q2 hopeful announcement with an OEM and a platform partner. So I don't know, is it ready? I think my guess would be that they need more development work before you get to a point where someone would want to take it and develop it. Or maybe you spin it out to the existing employees with a certain amount of money and just force those, them to do it. But again, that it's going to cost money. And that goes back to this culture of urgency to getting to a product that is licensable. When you're struggling for money in part, and with small teams, you can accomplish a lot. It doesn't feel like they're in that position. Again, I could be wrong. Always looking for inputs. So any of our Zoox listeners that want to convince us otherwise or provide us with data points that suggest otherwise, please reach out to us.
Please do. Now on to earnings. Let's start with Lyft. That was the biggest earnings of the week. What did you think?
Well, hold on, Grayson. I'm not sure what you mean by biggest. Lyft has a market cap of $5 billion. But there's another company, Aurora, that might not be perceived by investors as big. But after the 50% move, that stock is now worth $17 billion. So 3 times the market cap of Lyft, who's in the market today. Obviously not a ton of revenue yet at Aurora. And for our investors out there that are listening, saying like, can I even play around in this name? It trades 14 million shares a day and it's a $10 stock. So it is tradable and it's big. So I guess let's start with Aurora.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. $17 billion market cap versus Lyft's $5 billion market cap. Let that sit in for a minute. That's pretty intense there. And Aurora stock for the trader shot up 30% this week because Aurora announced that their Dallas to Houston safety case is 99% complete. As we know from previous quarters, they have told the market that they are going to go driver out by the end of April, Dallas to Houston. I fully believe that Aurora is going to accomplish that major milestone. When they accomplish that milestone, how does the market react? And are we going through a $20 billion market cap on that announcement?
Yeah, so I looked at that call. They didn't really say anything new, but maybe it was just the relief of them not kicking the can down the road. And, again, my takeaway from being out in the Valley this past week, I think they are going to deliver on that milestone. But the question is what's next? And I guess what's next is driving in the dark and also driving in weather, less exciting milestones, I guess, but certainly something achievable. Getting to tens of trucks, maybe that stuff is good. And I think just showing, maybe doing investor demos where people could see this stuff. I'm guessing, like I'm totally guessing, but are they going to just follow this first truck? Like they're going to have 10 trucks with a customer. They'll follow the one truck without a driver to make sure nothing happens. Who knows? Maybe I'll follow it. I'll find this thing. I'll follow it. I'll have you in the passenger seat. We'll video it. But I think the other thing that I kind of pulled out from this earnings call, which I think you can help me with, is understanding implementation. So Chris Urmson said, I'm going to quote from the call. He says, since our founding, our objective has been to deploy self-driving technology at scale. Our OEM and Tier 1 partnerships with Volvo, PACCAR, is it PACCAR or PACCAR?
PACCAR.
PACCAR, sorry, PACCAR, and Continental are unmatched in the industry. Then he goes on to talk about NVIDIA's Thor system. He says production samples of Drive Thor are coming in the first half of 2025 to start testing. Drive Thor is going to be the core. So this is the primary computer for the Aurora driver, which we're developing with Continental, who will manufacture it. We also continue to make meaningful progress on other aspects of this generation of the hardware kit. And then later in the call, Dave Madej, I think that's how you pronounce it. Sorry, Dave. I know you're probably listening. Says, at the very latest, when we have our hardware kit that's being produced by Continental, that is expected to be a line site install with their OEM partners that will go directly to customers. So when I read those words, Grayson, this is what my perception is of it's happening. A kit is like a third, like that's an aftermarket add-on. Like if we think about Waymo and those parking lots where they've got the Jaguars and they're putting the kits on. And in this case, I think what David is describing is you're just taking a kit to a line. So you're having maybe the OEM deploy it there, but it's not part of the actual manufacturing process. Meaning that, like at Waymo, when we looked at the Hyundai car, that doesn't look like a kit that's installed after the fact. That is integrated into, I think, the manufacturing line of that product. So is Aurora basically just doing kits? And if it's really just a kit and they're kind of the leader, how important are even these relationships with these trucking companies? I mean, I think they've been pitched within trucking as like the kingmakers. But I mean, if even Aurora is doing kits, doesn't that take away the power of Volvo, Daimler, others of being these kingmakers in the market?
It does. And what it further does, it further validates Don Burnett's strategy at Kodiak. Mr. Burnett gets beat up all the time. Oh, you don't have an OEM partner. You don't have an OEM partner. Well, Mr. Burnett has the SensorPods. And with the hardware kits, which was clearly stated on Aurora's earnings call, is the same thing as Kodiak SensorPods. It validates that because what Kodiak's doing today, they're going to upfitters and they're installing them. Aurora's just going to an OEM and installing them. Pretty much the same strategy at the end of the day. It just further validates Kodiak's strategy that Kodiak was right not being dependent on one fail point with the OEM. They can go anywhere.
Are we missing, like when they talk about the kit, does that include the redundancy that they're adding? Or is it possible that the kit is just the autonomy technology and there's still a benefit to what Aurora is doing in terms of the quote unquote partnerships of them implementing whatever redundancy that is required? Is there a fine difference there?
There's a fine difference. Aurora's delivering the self-driving technology in the kit. The OEM is delivering the redundant chassis. At some point, the redundant chassis is going to be available to buy on the market through a dealership because the dealers are going to have a cow. And so hypothetically, in the future, Kodiak could go to a dealer or their partner, very similar to what we saw with Atlas Energy, can go buy 1,000 trucks. Kodiak can go to an upfitter, put them on.
So should our lens on this industry change, or at least my lens, maybe I was always looking at it wrong, in terms of like locking in the OEMs? Or is it's still, the OEMs are still going to be important because they ultimately, depending on your business model, if you're going to sell the truck to the end customer, whether that customer is Amazon, Walmart, whoever, you want their maybe sales and distribution to sell it directly. So I think those partnerships are still important. Or with autonomy, does that change altogether? And can, the technology companies effectively end up selling directly to, the large buyers of these trucks?
They're still important, but I want to put this into context. Waymo does not have a quote unquote OEM partnership with Jaguar or Land Rover. They buy the vehicles and they are upfitted buy Magna. Kodiak's partners, let's use Atlas Energy, public there, they buy the pack car trucks. They're upfitted by a partner who we do not know. Same strategy that Waymo's taking. The days of the OEMs controlling all the power and being the make or break scenario, that's coming to an end. What Aurora has clearly said on the earnings call, what Mr. Burnett has said many times, that's the future. Having the OEM partnership is great, but it's no longer the kingmaker. Those days have sailed us by.
Yeah, they were maybe the kingmaker for a company that needed money. In Daimler's case, providing torque with the capital required, to kind of get to the next step. Look what the timeline is there, though. They're still 2 years out. But I guess I kind of agree with you. Even if they were the kingmaker historically, at the end of the day, it is a race at this point to see who can get to driver out first, then in tens and thousands. And if you're doing it by kit one way or another, I think the OEM just doesn't play a material role in that. And frankly, if someone gets in the lead in terms of the actual technology and it working, those guys are going to be coming to their doorsteps on hand and knee saying, can we use the technology in our trucks? And that power dynamic, I think, will change very quickly if it even existed in the first place.
It's clearly changing. I want to highlight for our listeners and viewers a very big caveat that's not really discussed publicly, but it's all publicly available data. Historically, the OEMs have charged the autonomous driving developers for a quote unquote partnership. The AV companies had to pay. That dynamic is about to get flipped on its head thanks to the acceleration of the kits.
All right. Well, it should be an interesting time. The other, part of that was Thor, and just kind of, as tech analysts like to say, double clicking down into the role NVIDIA will play. I mean, Thor as compute is going to be critical to Nuro in terms of what they're doing. The Thor is talk about a supercomputer. I mean, I don't know. We don't have much information on exactly how much compute's in a Waymo or where the newest Teslas are going to come out. Is this overkill? I mean, everything we've learned about is that models should get smaller and use less compute. And I think Jay-Z at Nuro has the belief that these models are only going to get bigger, not smaller, in the world of autonomy. Where do you come out on this?
Models are going to become more specialized at the end of the day. And as the models evolve, the power requirements will drive down and be less power requirements. Does NVIDIA always have a monopoly for cars? No. I have a lot of really good feelings in doing research where the Qualcomm Snapdragon digital chassis could play a role. You could have somebody that could develop something on an ARM chip structure. So there's a lot of change coming to that market. I do not believe that the NVIDIA de facto monopoly will hold over the long term.
We'll see, but in the meantime, NVIDIA, I think, probably wants to do more than just compute and add to the stack, go to modules, do sensor suites or whatever it is. So if that's the case, if what you're suggesting is the case, do we come back to a world where maybe NVIDIA does more than just invest in autonomy technology, but starts to own some of that as well?
My honest opinion, NVIDIA is going to have to go vertical at some point if they really want to conquer a big chunk of the autonomous driving market.
So if they go vertical, then does that negatively impact their ability to sell, some of this product? I mean, I guess at one point Qualcomm made their own phones and then they sold their own chips, and then people didn't want to use them because, they were getting the licensing on the chips, they were selling the chips, and then they were selling phones. So there has been places where you've been vertically integrated and still are able to sell the chips if your chips are still the best on the market.
I believe they still will be able to sell them. Obviously, NVIDIA really has a clear desire for autonomous driving. They have a division inside of automotive. They just invested in WeRide. They've made several other investments in there, which raises the question, if they do want to vertically integrate, does NVIDIA buy Nuro? Does NVIDIA buy Wave and then license that out and leverage their chip structure to try and drive revenue there? Because let's be honest, NVIDIA needs a new source of revenue growth after data centers.
I know we have a lot of people that love Elon out there, and Grayson and I think are indifferent. We're not lovers, we're not haters, but there is a lot of love for Jensen. So if they actually did buy Nuro, Wave, whatever, they increase the vertical stack. I would liken that to like whenever Elon gets into a space, every stock in that space and the ability to get financing from any competitor to Elon gets put immediately in doubt. So if if NVIDIA went that route, would that be a huge negative in terms of the ability of the remaining players to get financing, to do the funding that's required for them to get their technology off the ground and on OEMs?
No, which it would just validate it because a lot of the investments that come from NVIDIA are paid for in chips, not in cash. Big difference there.
I know, but if they're vertically integrated where they become the actual seller of the technology, that presents a much formidable, like if Nuro is now owned by NVIDIA, no offense to Nuro, really smart people, great product, but the credibility of that company goes up tenfold.
100%. 100% agree with that.
So if you're a competitor then to Nuro or whoever NVIDIA may or may not purchase, it's going to be just hard. The risk factors to you go up, so your ability to raise capital gets more difficult. So it's not. I don't know, dude. I think that's not exactly great for the. It's great for us, right? In terms of like having a part. I'd rather have NVIDIA. I think investing, partnering, maybe increase the stack a little bit, but not really deep in the stack in terms of what they're selling to the end customer or to the OEMs.
Look at cloud. Google Cloud Compute. Autonomous driving companies run on Google Cloud Compute. Look at AWS. Autonomous driving companies run on AWS. There's a lot of overlap and a lot of competition in the market.
So let's go to one of NVIDIA's good partners, which we've been talking about here, is Nuro. I mean, big milestone for them is going to be, they've announced this pivot at the end of last year. You had done a great podcast on that, which I think was very helpful. I think they're hopeful to get a platform partner, meaning like an Uber or Lyft, as well as an OEM partner. It's been a couple of months. What do you think? Can they get this done by mid-year? And whatever they get done with whoever it is, and let's not speculate who, how quickly is that product going to be in the market, however you define being in the market?
I'll go on the record and say I believe they'll have an OEM deal and a platform deal by July. I don't know who the OEM will be. The platform, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Uber, just based on all the statements that Mr. Karashaki has made. Also in the Q4 2024 earnings release with the autonomous vehicle supplement, the Nuro logo was on that deck. So just want to highlight that. So that's where I'm going with that. I've been in the vehicle. They've been very kind to put me in the vehicle. Testing mid to late, I would say late summer testing. Commercialization, I'll look for Q1 26.
Commercialization. That's aggressive. Okay. So, and testing meaning, you think that when this announcement comes out, and maybe there's a fourth partner in terms of financing stuff, who knows, but that they'll say like first half of 26, the OEM will have a product in the market for that people can use. Maybe it's level 4 type driving, level 3, level 4 driving for an end user. It's not like robo-taxi type stuff, but obviously if Uber's involved, it's probably heading that direction. It will be like a May Mobility type of announcement that we've seen previously. But you're saying first half, that's quick. So you think the technology is that far along at Nuro?
I do. And when I say the first half of 26, I want to clarify and emphasize the point that I believe that will still involve safety drivers. I do not believe by that point it will be driver out, but it will be involved with safety drivers fully testing.
I mean, that'd be huge. And that would be, if Uber was involved, good for them. I think you're being aggressive, but I always reserve the right to amend my opinion. I think they'll talk about maybe end of 2026. Again, I haven't had the benefit that you have in getting in the product. Again, great respect for everyone at Nuro and the relationship at NVIDIA, but I think your time frame feels a little tight to me. On the OEM front, without trying to predict who they're going to announce, because again, neither of us know, who is the most forward-leaning among the OEMs that are out there, and I guess who is the slowest in terms of getting ready to partner with, whether it's Nuro or other technology partners that are out there? You don't have to name, you don't have to go through the entire list, but who sticks out to you as kind of the most forward and then the slowest?
Slowest is Stellantis, because they've got to figure out what they're doing with the Jeep brand. That it's completely struggled under the old leadership, who has resigned. The most forward-leaning, there really is no forward-leaning when you look at the big three U.S. OEMs. When you dive deeper into that, let's go to Ford's earnings call. Mr. Farley came out on the earnings call and said that Ford's going to explore licensing. Ford has realized that's the path forward. So could Nuro cut a deal with Ford, since Mr. Farley is clearly open to licensing deals? Or does Nuro look to European OEMs? That question remains.
The other question is for Uber. Like they have, we talked a little bit about Waymo and, how I think Tesla may have helped to accelerate getting that off the ground. Who else out there other than Nuro could be their partner in the near term? Like, can there be another market where I can open up an app? And I think, Austin, you're already seeing people getting their early, I had some people hit me this week saying that they got alerts that, hey, we're coming to Austin soon. They showed the map. That's Waymo. Who else do you think Uber can be on the road with in 2025? And if not, in 2026? Is it May Mobility? Is it Nuro? Who else? Zoox?
Zoox, I'll reserve judgment. I think that they're trying to vertically integrate. I mean, as I said earlier, we have no clear insight into their strategy or to the business, but we do have clear insight and strategy too is May Mobility. Edwin Olson is the little engine that could, that great children's book. It was written off for years. And the gentleman kept going and going and going. They are now driver out in 2 cities, Sun City, Arizona, and Peachtree Corners, Georgia. They announced earlier this year that they're launching a full deployment on the Lyft network in Atlanta. Their partners going into Telco Corner, NTT out of Japan, and Toyota. NTT is the largest investor on their cap table. I could see May Mobility expanding with Uber because their vehicles work. Toyota, their dual redundancy platforms, perhaps it's May Mobility at the end of the day.
What does that mean for Lyft? Because, we talked about Lyft's market cap being $5 billion. And Uber's market cap is 167 billion, right? Global company. Lyft, I'm still hopeful that Lyft can get Waymo on board in the United States. If Uber does something with May in a market in 2024, is that really bad in terms of the perception of where Lyft is in the market in terms of autonomy?
Yes. If May Mobility got a deal with Uber, they announced that they deployed in a market sometime this year, 2025, yes, it is very bad for Lyft.
Maybe I'm missing something, but there's certainly incentive for May to do it. There's incentive for Uber to do it. I don't think that the Lyft deal was exclusive. It doesn't have to be Atlanta. So, I guess May Mobility is our next announcement for Uber then, right? That seems to make the most sense. If that's the case, which market do you think? Well, you're taking a wild guess here. What's your wild guess on which market that they would do it in? Maybe May wants to shake things up with Waymo and, pick a market where there's snow, or maybe get New York. Where do you think May goes next if they do something with Uber?
May Mobility is currently operating in Ann Arbor in the snow. Edwin Olson's very kind to invite me. I'm going next month to go drive her out in the snow in May Mobility. So they've achieved it in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it gets cold up there. To shake things up, I know you really want New York. I don't really see New York. I'm going to go with my gut, and I'm going to say to our friend from Alto who listens all the time, Dallas.
Dallas? Oh, that's weak. What about go for the kill shot with Detroit, where there's snow, close to Ann Arbor, close to home. Detroit and Uber. I'm going to predict. I'm throwing that out there. Lions, sorry, you choked, but maybe this is your comeback. I shouldn't say that about the Lions. Great team, great coaching staff, too many injuries for them to survive. We look forward to playing you next year and kicking your ass.
Sometimes you just have to kick the field goal. And perhaps Detroit's the field goal for May and Uber. It could be. There are multiple markets in the United States. I don't know if there's enough revenue in Detroit. I'll say Dallas because this could be the team, Andrew McDonald, the team at Uber could be strategic because by 2026 Mobileye, he's going to have robo-taxis. We don't know who the OEM is running on the Lyft network in Dallas. The interesting thing is we know it's going to be owned by a Japanese trading firm where Berkshire Hathaway is a major investor called, I'm going to butcher this, Marbiya. I know I butchered the name. I'm sorry for that. But the fact that Berkshire is an investor is interesting. The fact that these are going to be Mobileye, but yet I don't know one single person that has been in a level 4 Mobileye vehicle, one. And two, the announcement does not state who the OEM partner is. Could it be VW since they have the ID bus in Austin and Mobileye has a very public partnership with them?
I don't know, man. And we've gotten inbounds. Why don't we cover Mobileye more? But to your point, what are we covering? In terms of what is their path to getting product in the market. So Look, the bigger issue there is I guess it's Marubeni, just the size of that company and what it means in terms of validating fleets and the ability to finance fleets. So I think, that's certainly, those are dollars associated with that. And getting off topic, but I think same thing with Uber in terms of fleet management, where you're going to see we've talked about this a lot on the podcast. I think there's deals that are in the works. There's potentially international partners willing to come in on the fleet management side. A lot of times Lyft, when they talk about it, will reference, what's the name of the company that the subsidiary, whatever it's called? FlexDrive. Let's be clear, FlexDrive is about renting you a car. It's not about your car pulling in, charging it, cleaning it, storing it, being in those locations. There is a real estate play to be had here, whether it's international partners, whether it's individual deals getting seeded by Uber and Lyft, whether it's private equity coming in. You got to start working on that now, I think, before the fleets kick in. I think this is getting ignored a little bit in terms of the opportunity that exists. Real estate is a great fucking play and, can it drive capital, whether you get the favorable tax status that we've talked about before or not. So maybe Marubeni is kind of an indication of that. I don't think FlexDrive, Fleet Drive, whatever Lyft has I think that's overstated in terms of the role that they can play in fleet management. Again, could be wrong. Happy to engage with people at FlexDrive, but leasing cars to drivers, that's not the same. It just isn't. Sorry.
We had that one that SoftBank backed. I don't remember the exact name, slips my mind, but that shut down pretty bad. And SoftBank lost a lot of money on there. But SoftBank is a Japanese conglomerate. We're seeing the trend of Japanese trading houses looking at fleets. Is this their Hollywood 2.0 moment? And I say that because way back when Lou Wasserman sold MCA to a Japanese trading house, do we see the Japanese trading houses moving in and trying to manage and own these fleets? Since we're seeing the trend there with Lyft, we're seeing the trend there with Waymo in Tokyo. Do they evolve and come back?
Capital? It's a capital play, right? So yeah, it's possible, but I think, again, as I've said many times before, if there's a return to be had, capital will flow, whether it's from Japan or elsewhere.
If that does hold, do we see a Japanese trading house then try and buy the Waymo fleet here in America and hold it?
Absolutely. And if that, again, I think you're getting too focused on a Japanese, that is not the only capital that exists in this world. They have favorable rates that enable that, perhaps, and companies set up to do that. But again, if you look at Uber and who their fleet partners are around the world, it's not just Japan, right? There are a variety of countries where there are large fleet managers that exist and are interested, I think, in entering the U.S. as well.
A lot of things are going to change, and I think you're right that your autonomous vehicle idea is going to take off at some point because we are needing vehicles. And when you look at vehicles being deployed, so we talk about autonomous trucks, talk about autonomous vehicles, there's also the big segment that's growing of delivery. On the latest earnings call, DoorDash is talking about they're currently exploring autonomous vehicles for delivery. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's, that is the future. This is why we are such good friends now, Grayson. Autonomy is the future, whether that's delivering food or delivering people. The question, though, is it a purpose-driven vehicle? Like Nuro in this pivot, which could lead, we hope, to a very exciting announcement within the next couple of months in partnering with an OEM. Let's not forget they had purpose-driven robots delivering food. And I think they're effectively trying to sell that business right now. And like I said earlier in the podcast, I'm not sure that is the way to go long term. I could be wrong. But, so we'll see what these early partnerships, it could be nothing more than effectively science projects, but I think we'll get good signal one way or another because I think Nuro did a pretty good job and they signed up, I think, what was it was it Pizza Hut or someone? They had a couple of different enterprise customers.
Domino's,
whatever it is. Domino's, obviously a technology forward company. Let's see if Nuro can sell it, who buys it and what they do with it. And if not, then maybe autonomy for food ends up, which by the way, a lot of parts in the country, you have literally guys on bicycles or scooters or whatever that's delivering this food in terms of incremental cost. Let's see what happens in Nuro first before we get too excited about DoorDash's plans.
Not to get too excited, but Whoever's doing this has to solve the first and last 10-foot problem. That has to be solved. Will they come to the vehicle to get it? That's the question that we don't have enough data on. But what we do have data on, and I understand why Tony Xu wants this, and this is on the earnings call. In 2024, DoorDash paid out $18 billion to Dashers, which are their delivery drivers globally. $18 billion. With autonomy, that goes away.
It's not going to completely go away overnight. And like anything in technology, when certain things go away, other things grow. And I think there's substantial evidence about how broadband and technology or whatever it is enters markets, GDP growth there ends up being greater. Doesn't necessarily benefit everyone the same way, but there are obviously growth opportunities. And I think you and I both agree the transformation that autonomy can provide in terms of people, goods, and services is significant, right? It's almost as big. Let's just call it. It's very significant. So yeah, 18 billion may shift to other companies, but that's to the benefit of consumers and certainly other companies.
We talked about a lot this week, Walt. We talked about autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks, delivery, but we didn't talk yet about the unforced error of the week. To me, that's BYD's branding of their autonomous vehicle and level 2 system called God's Eye. That's a horrible, horrible branding name. I can see a headline now. God gets an autonomous vehicle crash. God's Eye ordered me to crash car. God's Eye did this. God told me to do this. That's really bad. That's the unforced error of the week. It's bad.
That's pretty bad. It's kind of like the Chevy Nova that they tried to sell in Mexico or South America. Novas.
Branding errors are unforced errors.
I have no unforced errors this week. It's been a great week. The Eagles have won the Super Bowl. So, nothing can go wrong from here on out.
We had happy Walt this week. That's what we had. We had happy Walt. The Eagles won. I got to give a shout out to the Eagles fans. It's great. The gentleman climbs up to the top of the Citizens Bank Stadium. They start throwing beers to him. The guy's chugging them on top of the thing. Only in Philadelphia, Walt. Only in Philadelphia. And in your honor, I'll be very proud that you'll know, I am making homemade Philly cheesesteaks this weekend in your honor of your great victory.
Nice. Good job.
What do we need to look for in the autonomy markets next week?
It's going to be a slow week. You have New York schools are off, so on Wall Street, that tends to slow things down pretty significantly. We do have a teased Apple product announcement that actually Elon Musk retweeted, so that's created a lot of speculation on what that can mean. I have no idea. Maybe like a cheaper phone, maybe something that's enabled by Starlink, the satellite connectivity business of SpaceX. I'm sure, the Tesla people are speculating on something even, beyond that. But what do you think?
Apple needs to innovate. Apple needs to come out with products that consumers want.
I mean, look, if you want to talk, if any of our listeners want to hear about media and what we think on that side of things, we talked a little bit about this because Apple TV Plus is now available on Android. How many years later? First you had to buy the puck, and we talked about some of the innovation challenges that exist at Apple, among other things. So check out, just hit me up. That one's a private link, not publicly available like Autonomy Markets. So hit me up for if you want trying to get access to that, and we can see if we can help you out on that.
The Light Shed podcast is great. Reach out to Walt. I highly recommend you listen to it. I listen to it every week. I enjoy the banter with the three of you gentlemen going back and forth and Rich's insights on media. And I'm very proud to say Walt has Telco Corner that goes on the Light Shed podcast in about a minute and a half, 2 minutes if he's lucky, of Autonomy Markets. But it's all fun. We look forward to next week. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is autonomy kits. Walt, until next week.